Welcome to my channel. This is Sinister Grave, and I have a very special narration for you. Have you ever experienced a paranormal moment? Or experienced a moment where your mind is invaded by uncontrollable and invasive dark thoughts that are not your own? Well, in this story I am about to share with you, someone did. Years ago in Japan, there was an urgent need for new schools. There were rumors that the government needed to find cheap land on which they could build the schools on, so they built them on the sites of old cemeteries. This gave rise to the rumors and gossip amongst kids that their schools were haunted. They say that if you go to your school at midnight, you will see and hear many strange things, like candles floating across the school grounds, disembodied footprints echoing down the halls, statues with their eyes that follow you as you pass by. In the science room, the anatomical skeleton comes alive. You hear the sound of an invisible ball bouncing in the gym, and you might even see a ghost with a severed head flying around in the classrooms. If you walk across the schoolyard, ghostly hands will emerge from below and try to drag you down. If you dig on the school grounds, you will unearth headstones and tombs. If you go swimming in the pool, the ghostly hands will grab your legs and try to drown you. Old buildings appear on the school grounds, and there are staircases that lead to nowhere. If you walk them, you will disappear. They say that one stall in the toilets is haunted, and if you enter it, a rope will fall down from the ceiling in the shape of a noose. In one small town in Japan, there was a group of teenage boys who have heard rumors about their school. According to the legend, if you went to the school at midnight on the 15th day of the month, strange things would happen. There was this statue that stood on the path leading up to the school, and its eyes would supposedly follow you as you passed by. If you walked up the main stairs, the number of the steps would be different than when you walked down. If you turn on the taps in the science laboratory, blood would be flowing from them instead of water. And if anyone dared to enter the last stall in the toilet on the ground floor, that person would never be seen again. The boys decided to go to the school at night to test if these legends were true or if they were just stories. On the 15th day of the month, they sneaked out of their houses and met up exactly at midnight. There were 4 of them all together: Shinichi, Mikayo, Takashi, and Hiro. As they walked through the main school gates and up the path, the boys stared at the statue, waiting for something to happen. The eyes on the statue were looking to the left, and even as the boys passed by, the eyes did not move an inch. "So much for that stupid legend," one of the boys chuckled. They entered the school building and cautiously walked up the stairs, counting each step. 1, 2, 3. Eventually, there were 13 steps in total. "See, it's just another old wives' tale," said one of the boys. They made their way down to the corridor to the science laboratory, and they turned on all the taps. Instead of blood, all that came out was water. They let out a disappointing sigh. "I knew it! We came here in vain," one of the boys said. They decided to test out one more legend before they went home, and went to the toilets on the ground floor. However, when they came to the door of the toilets, a few of the boys lost their nerve. Although they had talked excitedly about it, none of them seemed in a hurry to enter the haunted stall. Finally, one boy, Shinichi, stepped forward and told the others that he was not afraid of anything, He pushed open the door and went into the toilet, while his friends waited outside. The boy looked at the clock. It was exactly 1 a.m. A minute later, Shinichi came out of the toilet with a grin on his face. "See, nothing," he said. "It's all just a bunch of kid stories and fairy tales." The boys all laughed and walked away. When they came down out of the school, they walked back down the path. Before leaving, they took one last look at the statue, but its eyes were still looking to the left. "Oh, what a letdown," one of the boys whispered contemptuously, and they all went home. The next morning, each of the boys received a worried phone call from Shinichi's mother. "Was Shin with you last night?" she demanded. "He wasn't here when I checked this morning in his room. He must have snuck out and still hasn't come home. Do you know where he is?" The boys felt something was wrong. In the end, they decided to tell their parents about the little trip they had taken at night before. Their parents contacted the school principal, and soon the adults, the kids, and the principal were gathering outside of the school. "What are you saying?" the school principal asked. "You're talking about the school statue outside of the school. The eyes of that statue have always looked right." "But when we were here last night, they were looking to the left," one of the boys explained. Entering the gate, they all were shocked to see that the statue was indeed looking to the right. "But what about the steps in the main staircase?" one of the boys cried. They all quickly ran to the staircase and counted the steps. 1, 2, 3. Eventually, they counted 12. "Yes," the school principal said. "The staircases have always had 12 steps. When it was being built, the architects made a mistake in the design. It was supposed to have 13 steps." "That's impossible," one of the boys whispered. "What about the taps in the lab?" Entering the science laboratory, they all looked at the sinks. Each one was caked with dark red stains. The boys were numb with fear. "What about Shin?" one of the boys mumbled. He went to the toilet." "All right, let's go and see," said the school principal in a grave voice. They all gathered around the toilets. The boys and their parents looked at each other nervously. The principal took a deep breath and reached out and pushed the door open. Shinichi's mother let out a blood-curdling scream and fainted. The others recoiled in horror, and some of them could not help vomiting all over the floor. The dead body of their friend, Shinichi, was hanging from the ceiling with a rope wrapped around his neck. His face was deathly pale and his eyes were wide open, frozen in a look of horror. His throat had been cut from ear to ear, and all of the blood had drained out of his body, covering the floor in a dark pool of dark red blood. His internal organs and intestines have been removed. They were sitting in a neat pile right in the center of the toilet. One of the boys was in a daze. He was staring unblinkingly at the watch on Shinichi's wrist. It had stopped completely at exactly 1 a.m. So this is an experience about a haunted abandoned girls' school that was converted into an army hospital that I'd encountered a few years ago. I was on a construction and demolition team in Maryland, and our next contract was to strip and tear down some old buildings that were part of this school. The series of buildings belonged to an old girls' school from the late 1800s, and later turned into an army hospital during World War II through Vietnam, where they brought the sick, the wounded, and the amputated. The buildings reminded me of the Hogwarts castle, but with a pagoda in the middle of the plot. The buildings have been abandoned for a while, and the army decided to sell it so that it can be turned into a residential condo establishment. So, with that being said, our job was to go in and strip and clean out all of the rooms and decaying wood so that renovation can begin. The demo team worked day and night, and I had a night shift. Our job was simple: clear out the rooms and knock down the decaying walls, floors, and ceilings. My team and I had to wear face masks because of the old mold that had accumulated over time. These buildings were very dangerous because of the amount of wood rot and mold everywhere. So in the briefing, we were warned to proceed with caution when entering and clearing out the rooms. The briefing took about an hour and a half because we were clearing the buildings one at a time, and that was a lot of ground to cover due to the size of the buildings. And after the briefing, my crew and I drank our coffees and prepared for a long night ahead of us. Anyway, one of my crew members told us that this place was dangerous and haunted. He said that there were rumors of restless spirits from the era of when the property was part of the girls' school. Not only that, the soldiers who have died here apparently, when being treated, also have angry spirits that haunt the grounds. Now, personally, I'm not sure if people actually died here or if there are any spirits, but I did assume that there were deaths due to the fact that this was an old army hospital during World War II through possibly Vietnam. However, another crew member said that when he was little, he was told stories not to go onto the property at night because you may hear the sounds of tormented spirits of the soldiers. Not only that, a group of kids in the 80s went into the seminary, and one of the kids had went into the buildings. From the rumor, he went home that night and later on went to the hospital. No one knows what happened, but the kid was shook, and it was said that he had never returned. Now, I'm not superstitious, but I did pick up that vibe when I was on this property, and those rumors were unsettling. Anyway, my crew and I went in to clear one of the main buildings by the pagoda on the property. We went in with lights, carts, bags, and a hammer to clear the debris and old items from the rooms. The floorboards were very weak, and some of them were broken. It was an eerie scene, to be honest. Everything was covered with dust and cobwebs. And with my heavy-duty gloves on, I began to pick up the debris. Rotted wood, rusty pipes and metals, moldy carpets, all of which I collected so far. And you know what? So far it seemed like a normal night at work, nothing more. It was like that for a few weeks until we started tearing down the walls. My first task was to take down the wall that connected a room to another. Honestly, it's my favorite aspect of the job, knocking down walls with a sledgehammer. But anyway, I remember lifting up my hammer, calling in to my crew that I am about to begin, and swinging against the wall. Dust flew everywhere. With my flashlight, I can only see the particles surrounding me. I waved my hand to see the damage I'd made, and it was pretty significant since the walls were rotting. I created a hole in the wall, and I was able to see on the other side. And it was just another room. I began striking against the wall again and again, and before the final blow, I raised my hammer up, and an eerie voice whispered into my ear, saying something like, "What are you doing to the walls?" Who's there? I quickly looked around. There was no one there. I was startled, but I kept looking for who said that. And when I looked down at my arms, I had goosebumps. and the hairs on my arms were standing tall as if it was about to give off a static discharge. The room was empty besides me and the broken wall. I paused for a moment to tell myself that it was nothing, and eventually I returned to tearing down the wall. After dragging out debris, I linked up with my crew for a smoke break. I told them what had happened, and they all laughed at me hysterically. All of them, but one. After we finished our cigarettes, one of the crew members who didn't laugh approached me and told me that something similar happened to him. Not only did he hear someone whispering who wasn't there, but he also saw a shadow move into the corner of the room. He told me he shined his light on the shadow and it disappeared. Even though we were both experiencing something weird, we both agreed that it was probably nothing but mind games and that we should probably get back to work. The next few weeks was going fine and our progress was fast. We were clearing out a section of the bridges that connected some of the main structures of the old school. As usual, things were going well, and it was about time to have another smoke break. This time I decided to wander with the crew member that was spooked a few weeks ago to a path behind the buildings of the property. As we went down the path, it was covered with ivy and weeds as tall as we were. Going through there felt like a spooky adventure, to be honest. And we eventually reached a hillside between the cover of the weeds and trees. We saw a run-down cottage that was a few stories high, and a massive, rotting square building covered in ivy. Both of us were astonished because we knew that it was back there, but this was the first time that we saw it. Although with a fog rolling in, these buildings looked very, very eerie. We decided to light up a cigarette and go into the cottage, since the doors on it were poorly sealed. Looking into a window of the cottage at the second level, which was on the higher ground, the second level floor was 75% destroyed and laying at the bottom of the first level. The wood looked extremely rotted, and there were still furnishing items strewn across the floor. I looked at my coworker and I said, "You know what? We still have time. I bet there's some cool shit down there. And it doesn't look like part of the hospital." Well, sure. But let's put our masks on before we go in and go through the first level because of the rotting wood and mold," replied my coworker. And from there we walked to the bottom of the structure and pried open one of the sealed doors with one of our hammers. As the door opened, a gust of cold wind mixed with dust blasted us in the face. I wiped my eyes with my sleeve, and I cautiously stepped into the abandoned cottage. Out of all the buildings, this one was definitely the creepiest. The floor was so rotted, every step forward we had to be slow and precise. The wood beneath us creaked loudly as we were making our way into the building. As we were spectating our surroundings, the wind shifted the house, and small pieces of wood fell upon us. The dust kicked up everywhere in the house. "Shit. Are you okay?" I asked. I'm fine, just a scratch," my coworker replied. "Oh man, think we should leave," he added. I nodded my head and said, "Okay, let's go." A soft shadow moved across the dim-lighted floor towards us. "Whoa, tell me you just saw that," I said in a frightened tone. My coworker froze up and slowly turned his head towards me and said, "Please, leave me here. I'm a goner. I'm a goner. Leave me." His eyes were wide open, and his light brown skin turned pale. His arms had goosebumps, and his hairs on his arms were standing up, just like mine, before in the first room that I worked on. His head was shaking quickly in a twitching motion. It was truly bewildering, and I began to feel faint. My hands started to go numb, as if my hands were no longer there. I could feel my skin getting colder and colder. A dark cloud of depression and the feeling of hopelessness invaded my mind. What is happening to me? Shortly after, I began to violently cough, as did my coworker. A few moments later, I collapsed to the ground on one knee to try and catch my breath. But the amount of dust on my mask was becoming too much for me to get full breaths. And suddenly, all of those feelings have stopped, and the shadow that surrounded us moved away. We both looked at each other. My coworker's skin returned to normal and he stopped shaking. When we came to our senses, we both bolted out of the cottage and shut the door. Once we were outside, we laid down on the grass and we talked about what had happened. We didn't know what exactly occurred or why my coworker said, "Leave me here," and all of that stuff, but we both promised to each other that we would never talk about it to anyone, ever. Maybe it was a freak mental breakdown, or maybe it was a tormented spirit of an amputated soldier. But what I can tell you is from that day on, long after the renovations of the building were complete for residential living, I've continued to experience feelings of depression, anxiety, and hopelessness. Thank you for watching my video. Like and subscribe to my channel if you didn't, and share my content with your friends and community. There are more sinister stories to come. However, as a heads up, I will be absent for a few days. In this time, I will be building up a 40-minute to an hour-long video. And with that being said, visit other channels in the meantime, like Mortis Media. Well, until next time, stay sinister, stay grave.